Well, welcome. I'm glad that you've attended. And my goal tonight is to uh, walk you through some texts that are central to our story, and think about them in light of our own personal teshuvah. So, with that, let me step back before we jump in and say this. So, beginning with the first of Elul, and we had Rosh Chodesh starting on Wednesday night. Um, we begin to really intensify our preparations for the Jewish New Year, for Rosh Hashanah, and for Yom Kippur. And the 40 days between the beginning of the month of Elul and Yom Kippur are often understood in light of the 40 days that Moses spent on Har Sinai. Now that's it's a little more interesting and complex than that because Moses, there were several series of 40 days. We're not going to go into that in great detail. But the main point that I want to convey to you is just that, as you probably know, that this is a period that's very auspicious for Teshuvah, and that we usually um, try to really focus our energies on Teshuvah. Now, why Dafka 40 days? Well, the first reason I already gave you, that because it's connected to Moshe's process of being with God on Har Sinai and seeking forgiveness for the Jewish people because of the golden calf. And so, in that sense, it's a kind of it's like the ideal case of Teshuvah. But also, just in general, I want to remind you that Teshuvah is a real thing. Teshuvah is a real thing. It's not a magic word or set of words that we kind of incant during the high holidays and pray for um, some magic forgiveness where we become a new person. But it's a real process that involves a lot of difficult work. So I want to just spend one moment talking about teshuva in very broad terms, and then we'll then we'll delve into the texts themselves. So the word teshuva, as you probably know, is multivalent, and sometimes it's very often translated as repentance. And practically speaking, that's a useful definition, but it doesn't get to the depth of the meaning of the word. Teshuva means answer. And in fact, there's a whole category of legal literature called teshuvot. So somebody will ask a rabbi a halachic question. And if it's something that hasn't been addressed before, then the rabbi may write a teshuvah, an answer that has kind of binding halachic force, at least on the people who follow that rabbi. But teshuva is also related to the root of the verb lashuv, to return. And that's kind of its most, I guess, pregnant meaning in terms of, at least for me, as we think about the process of self-rectification and self-exploration and elevation that is part and parcel to the process of the high holidays. It's really what the high holidays is about. When we talk about the high holidays, the Jewish New Year, really what the focus of it all is about the process of teshuvah for us individually and for us as a people to return to some kind of state uh, that and what the return is actually in itself could be a whole discussion, a whole class that we're not going to delve into. But are we returning to some primal state that we were in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, when we were totally unified with God? Are we returning to some imagined state that our ancestors had achieved before us, from which we have fallen? Um, or is there some other sense in which we're returning to our highest selves that each of us individually has to determine? Or are we simply returning to God and returning to Torah? But what I want to say about this is that I want to encourage you. This is the process of Teshuvah is, and I would say in some ways, what I would call Jewish spirituality, which is a term I love to use because it made my father's skin crawl. My father of blessed memory hated the word Jewish, the phrase Jewish spirituality, and we would sort of spar about that a little bit. But this is, there's a whole set of what I would call Jewish spiritual, there's Jewish spiritual practice sometimes is made more complicated or is obscured by Jewish religiosity and Jewish liturgy, which sounds really strange. But this is what I mean by that. There is a tendency for us to when you have an inherited religious system, and with a siddur, with an order that you can memorize and you can get to know, and that becomes familiar, and that familiarity can be very, very beautiful. But it can also dull us or it can obscure from us the broader picture. So we get to a process where we go through the motions and we say, oh yes, it's time to sing this song, or it's time for Kol Nidre, and it's so beautiful to hear it sung, and they're all my friends and people I know, and it's so familiar and it brings up memories and this and that we forget that Teshuvah is really, really a process of internal work. Teshuvah is not the process of going to shul for the high holidays, or in this case, this year, not going to shul for the high holidays. And it's not the process of just flipping through the pages of a book. It's the process of looking inside and trying to heal those parts of a broken self that stand in the way of development and stand in the way of becoming a source of healing and goodness in the world. It is a process of understanding your relationship to other people and improving that so you can interact with other people as the person you want to be and ought to be. It's the process of a congregation elevating itself in its work in its world, and finally of a people, the Jewish people, trying to return to its mission and its work in the world as given to us by God in the Torah, which is for us to become a blessing to all the people of the earth. That's really the process of Teshuvah. It's hard. It's hard. Teshuvah is hard. This is the time, I like to say, of awkward phone calls, where you call and you call out and you name with someone that you love, or maybe somebody just that you like and you have a relationship with, and you identify all of the things that you've been sort of tiptoeing around for the year, things that they did to aggrieve you or that they might not even be aware of, whatever it is. Sometimes Teshuvah can be kind of not so deep, and it's just sort of making corrections on little mistakes you've made. And sometimes it can be very, very powerful, the deepest kind of self-transformation. So I want to just remind everybody that there's still a ways to go before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I want to encourage you to carve out time to really do some self-reflection, because what you don't want to happen is to go into shul on Rosh Hashanah and open the machzor. Well, you won't be in shul this Rosh Hashanah. But you don't want to open up the machzor and then be thinking about regrets and mistakes and achievements and whatever else for the first time. So set aside time. I'm a journalist, as many of you know, so I do a lot of journaling. That's my way of getting outside of myself and reflecting. There are certainly other ways to do it, but now's the time. Okay, the last word of introduction I'll say, now I'll start to steer towards the text themselves, is that I'm doing something that's a little bit unusual in that very often when we study personal attributes, personal qualities of Teshuvah, that we tend not to make Moses the center of those studies. Very often we draw on the attributes of the Avot, or we look at Musar literature. Raise your hand if you've heard the word Musar, just so I have a sense. Okay. So Musar is kind of the study of self-cultivation, Jewish self-cultivation, sometimes translated as Jewish ethics, where you focus on different attributes that you're trying to cultivate or distance yourself from. Anyway, very often the literature of Musar, which is like kind of a pathway to Teshuvah, is often based on teachings in Pirkei Avot, which we're reading during this time of the year, or based on passages from Mishlei, Proverbs, or its own discourse of literature. But it doesn't usually actually focus on Moses as an individual. And I thought it would be interesting to take this period of Moses's time on Har Sinai and looking at all of the assorted literature from the Gemara, from the Midrash, from the commentators, see what we could see. And so that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do tonight. I have a ludicrous number of texts. I mean, like truly ridiculous. And so we're not going to try to get through all of them, but I'm going to pick some that I like, and we're going to find hopefully find some ideas that we can think about for Teshuvah. I can't help but point out that Maya and Chaim have a little baby with them. I still have not had the chance to hold this little beauty. Let's see here. Can we see? Hold on. Buzza, 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 buzza. Oh, boo-boo.
Amira.
Amira, what a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous girl. Oh God, I can't wait to hold her. It's such a well, I don't want to put bad words on it because it's such a beautiful gift for you, but I feel very sad that I've not yet had the chance to hold her.
Look, you're making her tired.
I have that effect on people. Okay.
Now we'll try not to distract you too much. She needs to burp sometimes, so just, you know.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Blame it on the baby, Maya. Blame it on the baby. Okay, here we go. Here we go. So let me figure out where we want to start, and then I'm going to, hold on, I'm going to open up Safaria, and I will show you my screen. One moment. Okay, so this is Safaria. We're going to go now. We're going right into the middle of Exodus because in Exodus in Parshat Yitro, whoops, it went forward a chapter. Hold on. In Parshat Yitro, we get to Har Sinai, and so here's where we're going to we're going to start. We're going to start with by reading a few verses, and then I'm going to share with you a text from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. We have a couple of Hasidic texts that I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on, but really, as I said, literature from the whole array of our tradition. Okay, so I'll make this a little bigger. I'll read a little bit of the Hebrew, and then I'll ask for an English reader. Okay. בחודש השלישי לצאת בני ישראל מארץ מצרים ביום הזה באו מדבר סיני וייסעו מרפידים ויבואו מדבר סיני ויחנו במדבר ויחן שם ישראל נגד ההר. Okay, will somebody read a few verses of the English?
Yeah. On the third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain.
Okay, keep going.
And Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine."
Okay, so this is the beginning of Moses' ascent up to Har Sinai. We're not quite there yet, but he's going to prepare the Israelites at God's insistence for their coming close to God, and then he'll go up to the mountain. And the narrative of the narrative on Mount Sinai from the Israelites' perspective, is broken up into different pieces. So in chapters 19, 24, 32, and 34 are the different sections that we're going to examine closely. And in between those, we have passages about, if you remember Parshat Truma, where the Mishkan is described in detail, Parshat Tetzaveh, where the clothing of the priests is. So, but we're going to be kind of leaping around a little bit. So first, we're going to look at a little passage from the Rebbe Nachman of Breslov on these words: "Umoshe Allah el Elohim," and Moses went up to God. Okay. All right, who will read this little passage from Rebbe Nachman? In addition, Chaim, why don't you be our reader in honor of Amira?
Okay. In addition, Moshe had another quality. No matter how high the level to which he ascended, he found God there, as it is written, and Moshe went up to the Lord, Exodus 19:3. We see in the physical world that a person who is down and out serves God and acknowledges him, but when he moves up, becoming affluent, he then forgets about God.
Keep going.
King David said, "If I ascend to heaven, you are there." Even in heaven, God is there. With each and every ascent, he must find God there. Yet we find that Elisha Acher ascended on high through a divine name, and even so denied the essence of God.
Okay, so this last part we're not gonna bother with for now, although it is totally fascinating. But and actually, Chaim, when I called on you, I wasn't thinking that you could use this text in your work. For those who don't know, Chaim is a financial planner, and he thinks a lot about how to integrate Jewish values and ideas into his work. But I didn't call on you for that reason. But hey, okay, so Likutei Moharan is the kind of the masterwork of Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who's a great Hasidic teacher. I think he's of the generation of the great grandchildren of the Baal Shem Tov, and what he's focusing on here is, and it's a little confusing because the translation there is a little bit different than it was in the original text. So I'll just change this. So there you go. Moshe went up to God. Okay, so now what's I think what's at the foundation of what the Rebbe Nachman is teaching here is the fact that Moshe has an unbelievable, unprecedented relationship with God, right? Moshe already, by the time we get to Exodus 19, we met Moshe back at the very, very beginning of the book of Exodus, and Moshe is already known to be a singular prophet. He's already been designated by God to bring God's people out of Egypt. And he's had all of the interactions with Pharaoh. All of his words of prophecy about the destruction of this massive, powerful nation have come true. And he is the singular leader who communicates with God. And yet, says Rabbi Nachman, nonetheless, Moshe Allah El Elohim, Moses went up to God. So in other words, he's reading this not as a kind of geographic statement, or I don't know, topographic, I'm not sure what the word is, but rather a spiritual, referring to a spiritual level. And then in addition, I think there's another sense of this, which is that even though, and here's where, let's see here, let's go back to this. He says in the physical world, that Rabbi Nachman says, we see in the physical world that a person who is down and out serves God and acknowledges him. But when he, and I'm sorry that I didn't have time to, or I didn't make time, I should say more honestly, to change the gendered language here, acknowledges God. But when the person moves up and becomes more affluent, the person then forgets about God. And so I think what he's saying is that Moshe, in addition to being at a high spiritual level, Moses already occupies a place of incredible honor. And it might have been tempting for a regular person to say, you know what, life is good. I'm no longer in that nightmare scenario in Egypt. we've got all the people here, and I have this relationship with them, and everyone's kind of comfortable, and I'm just going to kind of turn inward and do my own thing. But in spite of that temptation, Moshe Allah El Elohim, Moses went up to God. So let me ask you a question. Does this text have relevance to us? Obviously, I've brought it because I think it does, but does this text resonate, or does this sound like Rabbi Nachman's just speaking to some other audience when he says that a down and out person might seek God, but when you kind of become more comfortable, you stop doing that? So that's my question to you.
It's a fair question. What happens when we stop paying attention or stop focusing or thinking about
Right.
God? And what are the reasons? If this one that they're mentioning is you become affluent, are you then so caught up in the acquisition? What do they call it?
Right.
Affluenza.
Right.
That you have no room for God. You have no room
Right.
for thinking outside yourself. That probably is one of many reasons, but it's fair to focus on this one, especially before
Right.
the holidays.
Right. So thank you for saying that. That's exactly how I view it. Anybody else have any resonance with this before I try to open it up a little bit if we don't?
I was just talking to my mother about this yesterday, and we were talking about how when someone is weak or sick or has no money, they do seek out God because they feel like they need to be closer to God to receive His blessings. And then when you have money and you're well and you don't need to ask for blessings, that your focus comes off of God.
Right. 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 There's an irony in it, and we know this from experience that when life is hard is when we hit life's roadblocks, or we drive off the road, metaphorically speaking, although maybe literally, that's when we seek some kind of sense of understanding. What has gone wrong here? Why am I doing this? Why am I on this path? Why is nothing working? Why is my relationships are broken? I'm having trouble at work. There's just acrimony and division in my life. It's at those moments that we begin to seek broader answers. But when things are going well, we sort of like, I'm fine. I don't need to call my therapist this week. Everything's fine. By the way, yeah, sorry. I don't know who's speaking, but please.
Mike Leopold.
Voice from the heavens.
Yeah, Mike Leopold.
Hey,
I just wanted to say what you just described and what I came up with this, sorry for interrupting, was just an easy word. A word is pride.
Uh-huh. Say more. Say more.
Well, I mean, because I've gotten out of this mess, so to speak, and I don't have a need for God anymore.
Right.
And that's pride, I believe.
Right. Nice. I hadn't thought of it in terms of that word, but yeah, that absolutely fits. So thank you for sharing that, and no apologies for the interruption. Harvey, I'll get you in 1 second. I want to open up here the translation that Safaria provided. It's not terrible, but it's actually, I wish I had corrected this, because he says down and out is actually kind of okay. Lamata b'dachakut, it's actually very hard to translate, but somebody who's like really kind of under the gun or really suffering. I'm belaboring it because down and out to me suggests like financially down and out. And I think that the phrase, I would just sort of like, I would say somebody who is hurting. It's not a perfect translation, but I think it gets more to it. And also when he says somebody who becomes affluent, it's actually not really, I should just erase that. Because really it says when one moves up. It's whoopsie, what have I done? This phrase here, nitale lamala, somebody who sort of like is lifted up. So it could refer to any number of things. I don't think he's just talking about finances, although certainly that would be included in it. But I think he's talking about when life is hard, we seek deeper understanding. And when life is going well, we don't. But Moses's nature or his character was such that even when things were going well for him in the world, he still wanted to ascend. And I think that that's really important. Harvey, I've not forgotten about you, because for some of us going into this high holidays, for some of us, life is broken and we're really hurting in a very deep way. And things are not going our way. And we sort of naturally are seeking broader answers. For some of us, that will be explicitly, we're seeking something in the prayer book or in our prayers. For others of us, we might just be seeking larger meaning or to put our lives in context or to step back and to reflect. But we're trying to elevate spiritually because of this sense of brokenness. But for others of us this year, we're feeling, you know what, life is okay. Although I would say at this particular moment in our country, I think a lot of people are feeling like things are broken. But if we're not feeling under the gun, so to speak, if we're not feeling like at a personal loss or distressed, then we might not see that there's any growth to happen. And I think that that's a very ego-centered perspective, because it means that because I feel okay, maybe there's not really larger work to be done. And we instead need to look to Moshe as a model and say, no matter where we were, where we are, there's a higher level, a deeper level, I should say, of understanding about our role and responsibility in our own healing. Harvey, last comment, and then we're going to go to the next text.
It's best, at the risk of stating the obvious, it's best to have a steady relationship with God. If you are down and out and need the Lord, and then when you become affluent, don't need him anymore, it's a pretty shallow relationship. It's self-serving, right, and it's purposeless.
Yeah.
It's kind of like magical, some kind of magical reciprocity. If I cry out to the Lord, then he will, it's transactional, then he will respond.
Right. Right. No, I agree with you. I mean, it is a little superficial, and I'm completely guilty of this, right? I mean, there's a little bit of a paradox, because, like, as the Baal Shem Tov famously said, and probably everybody here has heard this quote, there's nothing so whole as a broken heart. Sometimes it's attributed to Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, but I think it comes from the Baal Shem Tov. And so there, you know, for sure, there is something about brokenness that opens us up to a fuller, a curiosity about a larger sense of meaning that's often deeply, deeply healing. And I don't want to diminish that. But I have certainly found myself in phases where I've been on kind of a spiritual high, and I feel like I've opened some door that where my life is kind of going swimmingly. And I'm sort of like proud of myself for achieving some higher level of spiritual insight, which is revealed to be nonsense, because it's really just a new level of ego immersion. So anyway, that's what I think that the Rebbe Nachman is getting at here. By the way, if the Rebbe, there's nobody quite so weird and powerful as Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. And much of Likutei Moharan, this is a parenthetical here, Likutei Moharan is kind of his masterwork. It's a massive collection of his teachings, some of which are directly from him, and others of which are through his students. And it's totally magnificent, and parts of it are almost incomprehensible, but parts of it are just right on. And it has been translated into English in a multi-volume work whose name I don't remember. But anyway, I always like to give him a plug, like he needs my help. But I like to just share him because he's so powerful. Okay, so the first thing is just to realize that no matter where you are, there's growth to be done. So that was Moshe, always trying to ascend. And by one other thing I want to say about this is, by the way, Moshe knew both what it was like to be down and out and to be at a high level. We encounter him here through this teaching of Rabbi Nachman because things are going well for him, and nonetheless, he seeks to ascend to God. But remember that when he first encounters God, his life has completely fallen apart. He is wanted for murder in Egypt. He's a wanted man. He's has kind of no home. He's neither an Israelite nor an Egyptian nor a Midianite. He's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and that's when God first discovers him, and he doesn't even feel up to the task of being God's messenger. So Moshe, his whole life was about cleaving to God and trying to elevate himself, as Rabbi Nachman points out there. Okay. Hevin Moshe Rabbeinu, alav hashalom, mash alu sheha mitzorech lahachin levava mekodem la'alotam lamadrega gavoha. Okay, will somebody read this passage from the Shem Mishmuel, who died in the early 20th century? And the Shem Mishmuel is one of my favorite teachers. He comes through the line of Kotsk. If anybody's interested in this kind of Hasidic genealogy, his wife, I believe, was a granddaughter of the Kotzker, but in any event, he sort of represents tonally, he carries on this flavor of the school of Kotsk a little bit in terms of his intensity and his interest in personal, for want of a better word, kind of personal psychology and experience. Okay, will somebody read Moshe Understood? Whoa, things got weird. Okay. Okay, I will, if nobody else does. 3.
Moses understood his obligation to prepare their heart to ascend to a high level until they would be able to comprehend. And therefore it says, he called to the elders of the people, that is, as my father saw it. The word called implies being called to approach what is being spoken, like an intimate of the king who knocks on the door, having been called to enter the palace in the presence of the king. Thus the king elevates his exalted, and thus he calls to the elders of the people, meaning that he drew them toward him and elevated them towards the word of the covenant.
Okay, right. So I did a poor job of setting this up, but as Moshe comes down. As Moses comes down to the mountain for the first time, as you can see right here in verse 7 of chapter 19, Moses came, and what they've translated here as summoned is vayikra. Okay, so summoned is a perfectly reasonable translation. Vayikra, I would have said he called to the elders of Israel, or the elders of the people, and he put before them all that the Lord had commanded him. So you read this, and you know, just on the Peshat level, it's pretty straightforward what's happening. It just says Moses is doing exactly what he's supposed to do. He went up to God. God said, "Here's the deal. Now go tell the people." He goes down and he says to the elders, which makes sense. He's calling out to the officials, "Here's the deal." But says the Shem Mishmuel in the name of his father, there's actually something more significant going on, because he says the word vayikra has a very specific meaning. Vayikra, he says, everything that Harvey just read so beautifully. Yashikoah, Harvey. He says the verb called, vayikra, he called, implies that one is being called to approach the speaker, or what is being spoken in his somewhat awkward language, like an intimate of the king who knocks on the door. So if I, to take an example that's a little close to home, if I shout at my child or to my child, I am conveying information that I want him to hear. But if I call to my child, according to the Shem Shmuel, I'm drawing him close to me. Okay? So what is the Shem Shmuel getting at? What is it about the word Vayikra that he sees that's important in terms of understanding Moshe and who he was? It's not in the plain, it's not in the pshat of the text, it's not in the plain meaning of the text, but the Shem Shmuel is sort of riffing on this verb he called. What's he trying to get at?
Does it mean that he was resistant to going? I know part of Moses, what felt that he didn't have enough of personal charisma to actually lead and do.
It's really interesting that you say that, because what I did not include here was there's this whole first part of this comment that was just very, very long that I got rid of. And in the first part of the comment, the Shem Shmuel points out that God uses this word with Moshe to summon Moshe to him, to elevate Moshe to God's level, right? So rather than speaking at Moses's level, God, or the Torah, uses the word Vayikra El Moshe, and God called to Moses to elevate Moses. And so what the Shem Shmuel is getting at here is not quite what you were saying, Andy, at least in this section, but he's saying that Moshe was not simply not simply like a megaphone for God. He wasn't simply like the intermediary, the messenger, the FedEx guy, but he actually had a constructive role in understanding how to relate to the Ziknei Ha'am, the elders of the people, which is that he had this very elevated teaching that he needs to convey to them. And according to the Shem Shmuel, he does it so perfectly that he's able to elevate them to his level. Now, anybody who has kids or grandkids has been in a situation like this, where you realize it's very, very different from talking to just another adult. And sometimes I love to get in there with my kids, and we love to be really silly together. And sometimes it's a total pleasure to abandon adulthood and just be in the silly, crazy space with them and, absorb all of their glorious awesomeness, silliness. But other times, of course, as a parent, I need to elevate the discourse. And sometimes my kids will be able to meet me there, and sometimes they won't. And depending on their age, the situation, my skill as a teacher. And what the Shem Shmuel is saying is that what Moshe was able to do was he was able to elevate Ziknei Ha'am, the elders of the people, and to bring them to a higher spiritual level, so that they in turn could then convey to the Israelites the teachings that had to happen. And I'm focusing on this text because we often take for granted how we think of Moses as a teacher. That is, we don't think of him as a teacher. We just think of him as somebody who conveyed the words of God. And he was sort of like, as I said, like a FedEx guy or the postman. But our tradition has a lot to say about Moshe as a teacher and his ability to elevate those around him. So as we think about Teshuvah, our own personal Teshuvah, I want to offer this text and this idea about Moses in two different ways. In everybody on this call, is this a call, by the way? Can we call this a call? It would just be easier. I don't know what it's called. I'm going with call.
It's a summoning, Rabbi.
It's a summoning. Okay. It's a Zoom. Thank you, Rabbi. Everybody here is in relationship both with people who could use your guidance in elevating them, and you're also in relationship with people who you could learn a lot from and you could elevate to their level. Now, I'm not talking about, necessarily some spiritual master who you might be blessed to know in your life, or some wise person who has all the answers, whatever it might be. But just little things in attributes. Maybe somebody who's a soul who's just a blessing through their generosity or their patience, or a person who always has a beautiful word to say about another person. I'm not naturally gifted with any of those attributes that I just mentioned, and so I'm always trying to learn from people who have those things in abundance, so I can try to to elevate myself. And likewise, we often take for granted the fact that we have a lot to teach the people who we are in relationship with. And sometimes we do ourselves a disservice, we do other people a disservice by not taking seriously our role as a potential role model or as a teacher to the people in our lives. Now, if you're dealing with another adult, if we're talking about another adult in your life, very few adults that I know are going to be receptive to you saying, hey, let me teach you something. All right, I got a lot to teach you. Sit down for a minute. Like generally adults don't really love that. And I don't necessarily love it either. It doesn't mean I couldn't learn from the person, but it's a little off-putting if we're sort of explicitly wagging our finger at somebody. But if we can look inward and as part of our process of Teshuvah, not only appreciate what it is that we have to grow into, but also appreciate what it is that we have to teach, then we can bring that in a very beautiful way in our relationships and try to, in subtle ways and maybe sometimes in not subtle ways, try to elevate the people who are around us and that we are in relationship with, even as we're trying to learn from them and learn from the people that we're in relationship with. Questions, comments about that? Yes, Sarah, you got to unmute yourself.
Yes, I do. When I first looked, did you put the italics?
Well, the way that I usually do it, and I'm hesitant to say this because I'm not always consistent, the italics, that's how I designate that something is a quote from the Torah.
Okay. I looked at, whoops, put it back, there we go. I looked at this and I looked at the parallel italicized parts, trying to figure out how anybody would have drawn something from something that was identical. And yet I realize now that if I had paid more attention to the line before, that the king elevates him and exalts him.
Oh, yeah.
I would have picked up sooner that merely summoning, as opposed to calling like you're an intimate, drawing someone closer to you, actually imbued Moses with something that hadn't been there before. That elevating somebody can be bestowing an honor on them, you know?
Right.
But when he drew him closer and elevated him toward, let's say, the words of the covenant, he then imbued Moses, maybe because Moses was receptive, maybe because it was within him, but God imbued him with that by calling to him, not merely summoning. And so now I see it, but I went by the italics and thought there was no difference when in fact there's a huge difference.
I really loved that. You drew out something that I had not really thought about and noticed in the texts, and which really underscores the point, which is that there's a kind of intimacy and a closeness there that is a predicate to the elevation, to the drawing near. And you know, there's a text that I didn't include. And Linda, you're leaning in, which tells me you've maybe got something awesome to offer. So if you do, just raise your hand. There's a text I didn't include just because of time that talks about this moment when Moshe and Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, earlier in this chapter, are together, and Moses kisses, well, it says each one kissed the other. And there's a discussion in the Midrash about who kissed who first, and then you think like, why does this matter? But it says that Moses kissed him first. And one of the commentaries on that, Sarah, gets to exactly your point. There was an intimacy, and in Moses kissing him, according to this very creative interpretation, he was drawing him close and trying to elevate Yitro spiritually, to make a bond through which something important could be communicated and taught. And I think for sure, if we're talking about elevating other people, we have to, at least other adults in a kind of conversational context, we've got to be talking about people who we already have a close and trusting relationship with. Linda, you were nodding. Were you going to say something in response? You're muted, so.
Was he talking?
I know, here I am. Can I be heard now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was just really relating to the idea of this as a transmission. I mean, it's really just another word for what's already
Nice.
said, but it's a word I relate to, like in spiritual practice or in teaching or Dharma talks or drashas. You know, sometimes something happens where you hear something in a whole new way and it opens things up inside. And so I'm just kind
I love
that God offered Moshe that transmission. And again, it's just other language for the same thing that Sarah said, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that word. It's funny how sometimes the perfect word really unlocks the deeper meaning. And I think that word transmission is really beautiful, because it's a transmission of something you have to somebody who doesn't yet have it. So beautiful. So look to other people, whether they think of themselves as teachers or whether you just think of them as a teacher, and challenge yourself. We should all challenge ourselves to, sometimes we get jealous of people who have spiritual or psychological or social or whatever ethical skills that we haven't yet cultivated. But this is a great opportunity to try to see them as a transmitter of knowledge. And so too with people that we have something to share. Diane, did you want to say something?
Yeah, as I was thinking what Sarah and Linda were saying, and almost kind of tying back, one has to be receptive in order to kind of get that transmission. So kind of looping back to being, down, that's when you're receptive for that teaching.
Right.
So yeah, I was just kind of making those connections.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the elders had to be in a position where they were willing to be called. Right. And we have to be in a position where we're not so screwed up with defensiveness or self-involvement or whatever it is that we can hear the transmission to draw on that beautiful word. So yeah, yasher koach, thank you. See, this is why I love to do teachings in this way, because then you guys really help me open up these texts a lot more than I had at first. Okay, so let us go now to, let me share my screen with you again. Hold on, I see several chats that I've not noticed until right now. 1 second. Right. Okay, great. I'm just looking at some of the excellent comments in the box there. Okay, so so Moses summons the elders, and the people answer, and Moses has the interesting challenge of before the people have any mitzvot to kind of purify themselves, Moshe has to go. God says, here's what you got to do. You got to create like a boundary around the mountain and tell people to purify themselves. So he does that. And then at verse 21, I mean, we're skipping just unbelievably great verses, but I want to stay on tasks here. So, okay, so then at verse, at verse 20, Vayered Hashem el Har Sinai el Rosh Har vayikra Hashem lamoshe el Rosh Har vayal Moshe. So this really resonates with what I think, Sarah, you were saying, because here God calls to Moses, Vayikra Hashem lamoshe, because there's a real intimacy between Moses and God. But in any event, God came down upon Sinai, the top of the mountain, and the Lord transmitted to Moses, or called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Okay. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe red ha'ed ba'am. Then God said to Moses, go down and warn the people not to break through to the Lord to gaze, lest many of them perish. Okay, so this one is a little more provocative if we think about it in terms of our own lives. But this is the Kedushat Levi, who was one of the great Hasidic teachers. So somebody want to read, somebody want to read this Kedushat Levi here that I have highlighted?
Hashem said to Moses, "You are on a very high level, always cleaving to me. It is hard for you to understand how a person can transgress a commandment of God. Go down. That is to say, go down from your level and see that on a lower level, a person can transgress the commandment of God." And so he went down a second time and gathered with them.
So what the Kedushat Levi, and by the way, that's like a 17th century Hasidic teacher. And what he says here is, again, just as with Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who saw in the simple phrase, Moses went up to the mountain, the Rabbi Nachman saw a much more significant phrase than simply a discussion about physical ascent. So too, in God's command to Moses to go down, does the Kedushat Levi see something much more than just Moses walking down a mountain path? So it's referring to this phrase here. Red means it's an imperative for go down or descend. So Moses is physically like towards the top of the mountain, and God is saying to him on the Pshat level, go down the mountain and talk to the people. But the Kedushat Levi says that it means much more than that, because Hashem, in this, what I love about this is there's such compassion there's like pedagogical compassion, so to speak, that Hashem has, that he's trying to convey to Moses. He says, Moshe, you are at a very high level of prophecy, and you don't understand, Moses, that other people are not at that level. You don't understand that just because I say do X, you, Moshe, are going to do X because that's how you are. You're going to live your life in total, you're always thinking about the right thing to do. You're always trying to think about how to cleave to God. You're always trying to be at one with me. It wouldn't occur to you that somebody would just blow that off. But Moshe, you need to teach people who aren't at that level. And that's why you need to go down. So that is, leave your high level spiritually and go down so that you can communicate with the people, because only by going down can you then bring them up, right? So it fits a lot with the teaching that we just came across. Now, the reason I say this is a provocative teaching is because on the one hand, we don't want to be in a position where we're thinking of ourselves as being at such a far higher level than everyone else spiritually that we have to like come down so we can communicate with them. That's not really the point, because then we're really using this teaching as a ego inflation. But it's simply to recognize that in relationship with other people, in every dimension of our lives, sometimes we cause a lot of undue friction and hostility by not having compassion to see where other people are in their lives. Doesn't mean that if you have such a relationship, it doesn't mean that in general you're at a higher spiritual level or you're better than them. But think of a particular situation with conflict with another person where you've just been really disappointed or upset by something they did. And our immediate tendency is to go into the realm of judgment and to say, they should know that you can't do X, Y, and Z and not have someone get mad at you. They should know that they shouldn't have talked to me like that. They should know that they should have invited me and my friends over for Shabbos dinner or whatever it might be. And that's the way of justice. And sometimes that is very much needed. And we have to have that voice of high expectation. But other times we have to say, you know what, for whatever reason, accident of circumstance, or I got lucky, or I took a path and did some work that they never heard about, I can see what's happening with this person. And I need to let go of my judgment of them. And I need to kind of meet them where they are. And of course, then the more difficult part is to understand that there are many relationships where we are the ones that are at the lower level. and that we need to try to elevate ourselves, or we need other people to be patient with us. And so Moshe, taking instruction from God, and Sarah, I see your hand. Moshe, taking instruction from God, understands that in order to be the teacher of this people, he has to be in relationship with them. He has to be able to see the world through their eyes. And I think maybe that's the ikar, the essential point of this teaching, is having the breadth of the wisdom and the compassion to see the world and to see a relationship through the eyes of the other person. And when we do that, then we can actually build a channel of communication. And if we don't do that, we might just be hitting our heads against a wall. Sarah.
Oftentimes, you and I have talked about, excuse me, how inadequate English is when you're trying to translate. But I think that this word that and I just sent you the notes, you can ignore it now. It's in the core of the English word relationship. It means to relate.
Right.
God sends him down so he can relate to the people.
Right.
And then you found a dozen ways to say the same thing, and you said it clearly, but it's the word relate. And while I'm here, can I ask you another question about the Hebrew?
Okay.
I don't want, and when you said, let's not be weird here or provocative, I'm just curious. When God says you are on a very high level, always cleaving to me, is that the same word cleaving that we use when we talk about spouses or loved ones?
Well, first of all, just to be clear, the word is, I'm actually now looking for the Sefer for the book, which is buried in a pile on my bed somewhere, because this was by the way, some of the Kedushat Levi, who's magnificent and we should all be familiar with, some of it is available in English on Sefaria. This particular teaching was not, although teachings close to it in his book were there. I'm pretty sure it's Lidav Bake. And yeah, sorry, Rabbi, were you going to say something?
No, sometimes ledabek is used with married couples, and sometimes it's chibuk. There are different words for sexual cleaving and emotional cleaving than this word. It depends upon the context. And in here, I think he's talking about devekut, which is a Hasidic word, that they're using all the time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Thank you, by the way. That's Rabbi Jonathan Seidel. Well, I would say, yes. So what Rabbi is pointing out is that this word, I'm pretty sure, and I was looking for the Hebrew, and it's more than an arm's length away, so I can't find it. But I'm pretty sure it's devekut would be the noun, which is, as Rabbi Seidel just said, is a term that's used a lot in Chassidut to refer to just being in like kind of God consciousness, being with God. Okay, so I wanted to share that, because I think there's a lot of important lessons in that. And what we'll see, if I can stay on track here in terms of time, what we'll see is that what the Kedushat Levi is I think what he's doing in this is actually very interesting, because he's setting the stage for a kind of all-important transformation that happens in the relationship between Moses, God, and the people. So keep this teaching in mind. Okie dokie. Alrighty, so now we're going to leap forward to Exodus 32. And so what I skipped over something extremely important, by the way, which is the giving of the Ten Commandments and Moses' conveyance of the revelation. The reason I didn't focus on the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, is because I'm focusing on Moses' role in the story. And the Aseret HaDibrot don't mention Moshe. Obviously, he's central to that, but I'm focusing on his interactions with God and his interactions with the people. So I'm leapfrogging over that. And now what I'm going to is we have a jump cut. So we've jumped over Parshat Truma. and I think Parshat Tetzaveh. And we're now focusing on chapter 32, which is where the golden calf happens in Parshat Ki Tisa. Okay? So the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain. The people gathered against Aaron and said, "Come, make us a God who shall go before us. For that man Moshe, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." Okay, so that sets the stage for the golden calf. I'm not going to repeat the details of that sorry story, because you know at least enough of the broad outlines to understand what we're going to focus on here. But I want to jump to verse 10, because actually let's start here, verse 7. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lech red tishichet amcha asher ha'elita me'eretz Mitzrayim. Okay, will somebody read a couple of these verses in English? Let's take somebody who has not yet read, just to mix up the voices. Somebody would read, "The Lord spoke to Moses." Oh, don't make me do it. Okay, somebody who has read then. Anyone who knows English.
I'll read.
There you go. That's funny. Probably the one person who can read Hebrew fluently is now reading the English.
How about French? No. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely.
Keep going.
They have been quick to turn aside from the way I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'"
And by the way, those who have studied with me before know that there's a debate as to whether they actually thought they were making a god. Nachmanides Ramban says that's ridiculous. Nobody could think that they actually made a god. And so they're replacing Moses. They're replacing a leader, a symbolic leader, and not actually a god, but that's not really relevant. Okay, Sarah Sturtz, I'm looking at you. Will you read here?
Where are you pointing? Yes. Now let me be.
No, the Lord further said.
The Lord further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them, and make of you a great nation."
Okay, keep going.
But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand."
Okay, so now I want to look at, this is where I want to sort of turn a little bit and broaden this out to larger questions that are relevant to Teshuvah, but as a pathway to getting there, we're going to look at a couple of different texts. So Rashi has this to say. I'll give you a minute just to read the Rashi, which is, oopsie, what have I done? Oops, hold on. I'll give you a minute to read the Rashi, which is right there. So I'll sort of walk you through this. So what Rashi is pointing out is that in verse 10, Moses hasn't said anything. This is what's puzzling Rashi. Moses has not said anything. God is up there with him, and the people, Moses and God are up on the mountain. The people are down here doing the golden calf. God says, hey, this is happening. They're debasing themselves. Go down there. And then God says, now let me be, so my anger can blaze forth against them. And Rashi's pointing out, why did he say, let me be? Moses hasn't done anything, right? Let me be, according to Rashi, let me be would be something that you would say to someone who's kind of like harassing you or trying to get your attention, like as if Moses had been doing something. And what Rashi is saying is that God opened the door for him, so to speak. God is inviting Moses to pray on behalf of the people, right? It's almost like, I don't know, if you think of like the caricature of like the like the guilty the Jewish mom, like you're standing there, you're sitting over dinner, and like out of nowhere she says, no, I'm fine, let me be. You're like, I wasn't saying anything. It's like, clearly when a person does that, they're like inviting your engagement, and it's almost as like he's saying it. Rashi is reading, God is saying to Moses, oh, let me be now, please just leave me alone, inviting Moses to pray on behalf of the people. Okay, so now we're sort of shifting into different territory, because I just want you to keep this image in mind of God inviting Moses in, because God, I think, is trying to teach Moshe something about Moshe's role here. Okay. This one gets a little strange, but it's also beautiful. Well, why doesn't somebody read this one, and then we're going to kind of fold them together. This is from the Talmud. Somebody want to read and another interpretation?
You can take
I
that
will,
one.
Rabbi.
All right.
And another interpretation of the verse, and Moses beseeched
Vayachal.
before the Lord. It was taught in a
Baraita.
Rabbi Eliezer the Great says this term teaches that Moses stood in prayer before the Holy One, blessed be he, until
Sorry.
Margie Jacobson, until he was overcome by
Achilu.
What is the meaning of Achilu?
Yeah.
Rabbi Eliezer said it means fire in the bones.
Okay, so let me break this down. By the way, say hi to Margie. Okay, so Vayachal Moshe. So what he's looking at now is, okay, so now we're back in the Torah, chapter 32 of Exodus. God says, Ata hanichali, let me be, says God, so my anger can blaze forth against them. I'm going to destroy them and make of you a great nation. And then it says, Vayachal Moshe et Penei Hashem. Moses implored the Lord. Moses implored God. So the word Vayachal is understood conventionally to mean he implored God. He prayed. He was beseeching God. Okay, that's, I think, how I translated it over here. He beseeched God, but it's that verb Vayachal. Okay, the first word in verse 11. So Moses is imploring God, no, don't destroy them. Please don't destroy them. Okay, so the Gemara, the Talmud here, is doing something the Talmud does regularly, which for the Talmud is like normal business as usual, and for us is just like, what? So you got to sort of put on your Talmud like tinfoil hat so you can like receive the messages of the Gemara. So the Talmud sees a relationship between the verb vayachal, which means to beseech or to implore, and this word achilu, which apparently was a word which I think is an Aramaic word, which actually there's a whole side discussion the Talmud has about what the heck does achilu mean, but I cut that out. And the reason that it draws on this word is because the word achilu, you see this where I'm floating over here, has the letters chet and lamed. And the verb for beseech or implore has chet and lamed. And so again, for the Talmud, this is like business as usual. Like, hey, there's two words that have similar letters and no other relationship. They must be related. Okay, for the Gemara, you just got to sort of a little bit deal with your, what's that phrase that we learned in our high school literature class, willing suspension of disbelief. Okay, this is just a mode of interpretation the Gemara uses. But the upshot is that Moses had fire in the bones, which probably meant something like a fever, or he was like sick in his bones. He was like sick to death. So the Talmud is reading it not as Moses beseeched God, but Moses became deathly ill, Why was he deathly ill? I shouldn't say deathly. It doesn't say deathly. He became sick at heart. Why did he become sick at heart? Because he was so identified with the Jewish people that he couldn't even bear it. He couldn't bear the idea that God was going to punish them. So like at the mere thought of their suffering, he like contracts a fever and an illness. So on the one hand, we could go down the path of like, well, that doesn't sound very realistic, or, do we really get sick based on that kind of blah, 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 blah. Let's just approach this like literature for a moment and not be interested in whether it's literally true, and instead try to ask, what is the larger point that the Gemara is trying to make here? And the larger point, I think, is that Moshe is a singular figure, in not only in that he's the greatest prophet of all time, but also Moses lives his life quite alone. He spends a lot of time apart from his family. He is experiencing the revelation of Har Sinai alone as an individual on top of the mountain, while the other people are experiencing it as part of a mass of hundreds of thousands of people. And he has a relationship with God as such that it just serves to separate him from the people. And yet his heart is so deeply attached to his people that the notion of their suffering fills him with a sense of illness, like he can't go on. And what I want to point out here is, though I don't want to wish fire in the bones upon anybody, what I do want to say is that very often, in fact, the way we think of Teshuvah in the way that, in fact, I presented it this evening, we think of it as my path towards clearing up my relationship with God, my attempt to come to a higher spiritual level. And it is indeed that. But Moshe demonstrates that the highest level of Teshuvah is identifying your own neshama with that of your people. And at the moment, I'm not interested in a debate about whether your people is just Jewish people or the broader humanity, but simply the notion that the community of people that you will be, that you consider to be your community, your people, that your concern must extend not only to their physical well-being, but to their spiritual well-being. To an extent that we would find unhealthy, and a psychologist would find unhealthy, Moses' identification with the Jewish people is total. It's almost as though he doesn't exist. He has fire in his very bones. And by the way, the word, I didn't think of this until just now. Here it says Aish. Why do I keep doing that? Aish shel atzamot, which means fire in the bones. So that's when the Gemara is explaining what this weird word achilu means. The word atzamot, the root of the word atzamot is etzem, which means essence. So the word bone also is related to the word for the essence of a thing. So you could almost read this somewhat creatively as Moses is experiencing a suffering in his very essence of who he is, because his identification with his people, with his community, is so total. And I think that this is maybe one of the most difficult things for us to relate to as denizens of the modern world, because we have a world and an economy and a political system that is so predicated upon the individual, and the individual seeking his or her own self-interest and maximizing their happiness and all of that, that it's just hard for us to imagine this kind of mentality. But in Teshuvah, what we're really trying to do is to create unity. And that, I don't think we have to go down the road of codependence or unhealthy relationships to see that our lives are bound up with one another's. And when we think about Teshuvah, we need to be thinking about the Teshuvah of the people around us and how to elevate ourselves and how to address the suffering of other people as well. Okay, let me pause there because that was a long riff, and then I'm going to share one more teaching with you before we break for the evening. Comments, questions?
That was great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Somebody's waving their hand. Mickey, is that you waving your hand?
I hesitate to disagree with Rashi, but if I were reading this from a literary point of view, the way I take it is like God was so mad, and he knew Moses was up there for the people. He said, "Don't even talk to me. Don't start. I'm gonna get him.
Don't start. Don't start.
And Moses, of course, like the advocate he was, didn't take heed to that, and he started praying, convincing, talking to God, and he turned God around, which to me says, you know what? Even if God made a decision against you, if the cards are played right, if you're really, God can change her mind. It can be turned around. Nothing is that final. That's the way I would read it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No, I get that. That's totally reasonable. And just, I mean, I'm not going to argue with you at all, but because I'm sympathetic to your, right. Well, I'm always game for an argument, but right now I'm not going to argue. But I want to say that, yeah, no, I mean, I think your suspicion of the reading and your desire to read it kind of on the more pshat level is totally understandable. Just as a point of information, it's not Rashi's reading. Rashi's bringing the reading of the Midrash, just FYI. But I totally hear you. I totally hear you. Right. So you're saying the focus is on God, should be on God's fury, not on the supposed invitation that God might be making inside of that fury to have Moses arguing with him.
And the ability of Moses to change God's mind, essentially.
Right.
Rabbi?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Did Moses just achieve with God what you just said we need to do with our own community?
What do you mean?
In that he got God to elevate his thinking. God was
well, so it depends. That's really interesting. I mean, by the way, your question in light of Mickey's question makes me think that maybe one of the reasons for this midrashic reading of this notion that God is like inviting Moses in to pray is the idea that's resisting the notion that somehow God has to be perfected. Because if you read it in light of what Mickey said, then I think you can say that Moses helps elevate God. Mm-hmm. But if you read it the other way, then God already knows that what ought to happen is that the people ought to be forgiven. And he's trying to teach Moses that through prayer and the hard work, then the people can be forgiven. So I think it sort of depends how you read it. Okay, I'm going to do one little minor teaching, and then we're going to close with kind of what I think is a pretty heavy duty idea that I want to share with you. So 32:18. Okay. Okay, so here, let me share my screen. Okay, so chapter 15. So Moses implores God and says, don't let the Egyptians say that God brought the Israelites out just to die in the desert. This whole thing was a sham. Remember, Moses says to God, remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And rather pointedly, Moses says to him, you swore that you were going to make their offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven. And now you're talking about eliminating everybody, God. What's the deal? We're going to come back to that. God renounced the punishment. Okay, God renounces the punishment. And he's still going to punish them, but he's not going to wipe out the whole people and start over just with Moses, which is what he had suggested. Okay, so Moses comes down the mountain, and will somebody read here at verse 17, when Joshua heard? Because Moses comes down and he sees Joshua, and? Okay, I'll read it. When Joshua heard the sound of the people in its boisterousness, he said to Moses, there's a cry of war in the camp. Vayomer, but he answered, that is, Moses answered, Ein kol anot gvura, ein kol anot halusha, kol anot anochi shomea. It is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It's the sound of song that I hear. So this is very confusing, but let me give you kind of the pshat, the basic answer. Joshua thinks he hears like a battle cry of some kind. And he says to Moses, and keep in mind, Moses is just coming down the mountain, having just heard what's going on. Joshua hears from afar what he thinks is going on. And he says, it's not the tune of triumph, Joshua. This is not a battle call, Joshua. And it's not the sound of defeat. So this is not a military rallying call. It's the sound of song. It's the sound of, the Onkelos translation says it's the sound of laughter. It's the sound of singing. It's the sound of celebration that Moses is hearing. So it's just a bizarre interchange that seems like completely irrelevant, because then what happens, we go from that weird conversation where Joshua and Moses are disagreeing about what is the sound of the people are making in the camp. And from right there, it says, as soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. He hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. So that's when Moses breaks the tablets and gets mad at the people for the sin of the golden calf. So then it makes you wonder, well, what in the heck is the point of these two verses? And I've always wondered that, and I never had an answer. Like, why do we cut to this conversation about Moses and Joshua arguing about what is exactly the nature of the sound the Israelites are making? So there's a really cool passage in the Talmud that says, Moses said to Joshua, essentially what this conversation means is that Moses is saying to Joshua, a person who will one day lead hundreds of thousands of people can't tell the difference between one sound and another. So what's happening here is, according to the Talmud, by the way, who's the person who will one day lead hundreds of thousands of people? Who is that person?
It's Joshua.
Yeah, exactly. It's Joshua.
Your namesake. Yeah.
That's right, my namesake. So Moses is saying to Joshua, you are going to be the leader of this people, and you can't tell the difference between the sound of a celebration of idolatry and a military call. It's like a kind of like not a very nice moment. But this too, I think, we were talking earlier about trying to elevate other people or to be elevated by them. And Moshe, though our idea, I think we have this sort of like idea of what a spiritual leader should be, and the idea of like the enlightened, guru who's like has a smile on his face all the time or on her face and is always gentle with people and embracing them. And I think that in real life, an actual spiritual teacher is much more complicated than that. And Moshe is a little rough around the edges sometimes, because he's saying to Joshua, you have to be at a higher level than this. This little passage from the Gemara doesn't expand on exactly what he wants Joshua, what is the inner quality that he wants Joshua to attain. So let me ask you that. What is it that Moses thinks Joshua is missing? Why does it matter if he can hear the difference between one call and the other call? What's the leadership quality that Moses is seeking here?
Discernment.
Okay, great. Discernment.
Well, and two, listening, because when you listen carefully and pay attention, you can see the difference or hear the difference.
Nice.
So it's part of the
that's great.
Like you said.
That's great. Yeah, that's exactly right. And being able to listen and to discern what it is that this people that you're going to claim to be the leader of, whether they're on the path of idolatry or whether they're on a completely different path. Like, if you can't hear that, you don't know your people well enough, that's a problem. And so Moses is saying to Joshua, you've got to come up. You've got to come up. And I just want to say that, and here I want to be very careful, because if what we're talking about now is not done well, and it's hard to do well, it can completely backfire. But to be in real relationship with another person is to, if it's intimate, if you have the kind of closeness that we have in the relationships that mean the most to us, you can offer tochacha. You can offer rebuke is the English translation of tochacha, but it's not a great word, because rebuke sort of sounds one-sided, whereas tochacha is relational. Tochacha is the words of correction that you offer somebody that you deeply care about. Say it one more time.
Guidance.
Yeah, tochacha is like guidance. Yeah, that's right. But sometimes it can feel a little bit more like rebuke. I mean, it can be painful to get tochacha, but that's what we give to people that we really love and care about. And we live in a very kind of live and let live society, and like, yeah, I don't want to bum their stone, man. It's like, yeah, it's cool, that's their choice. And really, when we're saying that, what we're saying is, I'm afraid of approaching them. I'm self-conscious because I don't want to look like I'm holier than thou, or I'm just afraid that I'm going to look like not a cool, mellow guy or whatever. All of that is ego infatuation. If you focus instead on how you'll be received, if you focus instead on what is the right quality that we're trying to develop, then you can see that if it's a person you really care about and you love, that you want to offer them tochacha. And if it's a person who's ready to receive it, and if you offer it with love and compassion and gentleness, then at least I've found in my life that tochacha brings me much closer to people. I've actually elevated relationships and brought them to a new level through tochacha.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
It's Amanda.
Hi, I can tell. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. So, yeah, but I see what you're saying. However, Moshe was notoriously bad with his effective communication. He was a stutterer. I came in late to the class, but he was a stutterer. Right. He was a man of action. He worked with his hands. After this, he got so upset, he broke again, getting a little bit ahead of himself. And it also shows he was a little too rough, maybe. And wasn't dubbed. It's such a delicate dance to be an effective communicator. Yeah, he really was only good at communicating with Hashem.
That's interesting, right? I mean, I think, So a couple things. I mean, those are great thoughts, and I had not thought about it in terms of his stuttering, but I will say that one of the great stories, or the sub stories that's between the lines of the Torah, is the trajectory of Moshe from being a person who stutters at the beginning of the Torah to a person who, towards the end of the Torah, in Parshat Ha'azinu, nearly the very, very end of the Torah, opens his mouth and lets forth this gorgeous, magnificent, spontaneous, poetic song. And so I do think that he develops that over time, and that's part of his own self-rectification. But the other thing I would say, and this is a little bit of a cheapskate answer, a little too easy, is that there's the Moshe of the Torah Shebechtav, the Moses of the 5 books of the written Torah, and then there's the Moses as we read him through the eyes of the rabbis. And the rabbis, you can either say they're imposing a creative reading on the Torah, or you can say they're picking up on subtle clues of the Torah to reframe it and to present him as a teacher who's very kind of subtly attuned to the needs of his students. And I think one just sort of has to make a choice. So I totally hear you. The last thing I would say, Amanda, is that the breaking of the tablets is one of the most mysterious parts of the whole Torah. And when Moses shatters the tablets, as we just saw him do, there's a question as to whether that was a kind of accidental moment where his anger got the best of him, or whether it was actually an incredibly powerful teaching moment. And maybe we'll close on that idea. But first, I want to share with you. I want to just sort of reflect on the bigger picture of what's going on when we talk about Moses up on the mountain with God. So let's think about this. So God and Moshe are on Har Sinai, and God says, I was going to end this by 8:30, but I'm going to ask your indulgence. We're going to go a little bit late, and if you need to jump, I won't hold it against you, but I will be writing down names of people who leave early. No, I'm just kidding. So Moses is on the mountain with God, and God says, listen, well, we're up here talking about oneness of God, and we're talking about the importance of recognizing me and the importance of living a life of holiness. Your people, and God does pointedly say your people, are down there and they're destroying this whole dream we have. They are worshiping like they're at the most base level of worship. You know, they're like dancing around a golden calf that they made. They're drinking, they're laughing. Moses comes down and he sees them. And I think that moment when Moses comes down and he sees them and he breaks the tablets is actually something that that is very near and dear to our hearts. And this is what I mean by that. We read it initially and we think that this is a very peculiar moment in the life of the Jewish people. And we think that it's just a story about this one-time event when Moses and the Israelites were caught up in this debate about idolatry. But I want to suggest that Moses's fury is very revealing. Let me share my screen with you. We'll get to it. And by the way, I'm drawing in part on the God, all my books have fled. I guess I threw them, which one should never do with books. I'm drawing on the work of Aviva Zornberg in part. Aviva Zornberg, who is one of the great Torah teachers of our time. Rabbi Seidel's giving her a thumbs up. She has a book on she has a book on Genesis, on Exodus, and on the book of Numbers, and the one on Exodus is called The Particulars of Rapture. And there's a section there. There's an essay on Parashat Ki Tisa, which is quite amazing and beautiful. And part of my comments are inspired by her. So he comes down and he says, let me just get to where we want to be. Whoops, what have I done? Okay. Okay, so so Moses comes down the mountain and he breaks the tablets and he's furious. Why can I not find where they break the tablets here? Hold on. One second. Oh, there it is. Okay. So here it is. Okay, this is verse 11. So he comes down near the camp and he saw the calf and the dancing. And by the way, there's a beautiful teaching that says that it was only after he came near Karav, it was only after he came near the camp that he became enraged, which is very curious if you think about it, because he already knows what happened because God told him. But the Torah says it's only after he came close that he became enraged. And the Talmud finds a very important teaching in here, which is to say that we should never make a judgment about another person based on hearsay, and we should never sort of estimate or assume we know what's happening with another person. So Moses had to come close, see with his own eyes, and only then make a judgment, even though God himself had told him what was happening. But in any event, he becomes enraged. And what's so fascinating is what enrages him. It's not just that there's a golden calf. It's that there's macholot, that there's celebration and there's dancing. And I want to suggest, this is a little bit complicated to explain, or to articulate, I should say. I want to suggest that what is going on for Moses is not, I don't think this is a question of black and white. Like, it's clear everybody should be doing what God wants, and these people aren't doing what God wants, and that's bad. I think that there's a deeper anxiety, which is that Moses witnesses the world being ordered in a totally different way, and he sees that it's actually kind of working for them. I know that sounds crazy, and I'm not suggesting that Moses thinks that idolatry is okay, but we often, I think, have a fantasy of a world in which people who do the wrong thing will live lives of misery and suffering, right? Think of, like, without getting partisan, think of your favorite political bad guy, right? And you sort of, why is it, as Job asked, why do the wicked prosper? And I wonder if Moshe is looking at these people who are performing idolatry, and they're laughing, and they're celebrating, and they're being together, and they have like a little, they have a little calf that sort of is ordering their whole crazy little community. And I wonder if actually that's what freaks him out. It's not the appearance of evil and idolatry. It's that he witnesses its apparent viability. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's looking to a world of people who are doing the wrong thing, and he sees that, you know what? They don't seem to be upset. And I think that we have the same anxiety that Moshe has. We sometimes, what causes us to doubt is not our own shortcomings in terms of our commitment to higher ideals, but the persistence of evil in a world in which those who are practicing evil don't seem to suffer from it. And I know that I'm overreading this text. I'll just sort of commit to the fact that I'm overreading this text. But I have to wonder whether the inclusion of the detail about their dancing and their celebration is just so galling to Moshe, because he's coming down off of the spiritual high, and he wants to think that everyone's going to gravitate towards the good and towards the light, and that people who don't are just going to sort of be bereft and lost. But he sees that actually that's not the deal at all. They seem content and celebratory, and that creates in him a kind of rage that he can't give voice to. Andy.
Yeah, I'm curious. What's been going through my mind is that he was up there interceding for them and changing God's mind, not to be angry and destroy them, and he comes down and they're really
right
what he saw.
Yes.
And he was upset because here he was supplicating for them, and he comes down and they're way beyond what he imagined.
That's right. And so that's precisely, I'm so glad you said that. And that's precisely the note that I want to close on, is that in spite of this moment, what I'm presenting, quite without any rabbinic authority, but what I'm presenting is maybe not, it's not quite a crisis of faith, but a disturbance in the force that Moses witnesses in seeing that people who do the wrong thing can seemingly celebrate and be happy. That it makes the world more complex than maybe he wants it to be, or maybe just more complex than I want it to be. But nonetheless, Moshe's next step is to lay his life on the line for the people. In spite of the fact that this people that has presented him with this galling vision of a world totally opposed to God, and a world of disorder and chaos and self-involvement and ego and just gratuitous, self-concern. Nonetheless, the rest of the story, which I regret I didn't quite leave enough time for us to get to, is Moses imploring God to forgive the people, quite without any justification, without any justification. So there is the part where God says, or Moses says, hey, everybody who's for God, come over to me. And the tribe of Levi comes to him. But in fact, Moses asks for God to forgive everybody. And to me, it's so significant that he does that beyond what would be justified, that he asks for a kind of mercy and forgiveness that's not warranted by their behavior. And I think that message, if we integrate that into our own lives and our own relationships, is so powerful and so demanding, that the request for forgiveness is not just for ourselves, and it's not just for the people in our lives who we know are trying to do better, but we have to have mercy and compassion for the broader part of the human community, and wish for their best and pray that they can be elevated, and pray that they can be forgiven and find Teshuvah in their own way. Mm-hmm. And to walk into the month of Elul and towards Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with a heart that almost knows no boundaries in terms of its desire to see other people elevated in spite of our own doubts, I think is maybe too high of a level for us to say that we can achieve with certainty. But certainly, I think what Moshe is calling on us to aspire to. And that's what I got. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sorry that I went a little bit longer than I was supposed to, but it was great to learn with you. And if there are any final comments, now's the time.
I guess it's no mistake why they're called the children of Israel.
Very nice. Linda, go ahead.
I actually want to hear what Sarah just said. It wasn't loud enough.
Oh, she said she thinks that's why they're called the children of Israel, because they're acting like children.
Linda, I was a middle school teacher for 30 years. I can relate to pleading on behalf of your beloved students.
Right.
Coming back into the room and discovering that in your absence, they have a golden calf.
Right.
Throwing down the tablets.
Yeah.
It's perfectly understandable.
Right.
On that note.
Yeah.
Sarah, you are awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Lila Tov, thank you. Rabbi Seidel, thanks for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shikoa, thank you.